Ellen, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you back.
Thank you for having me back
on the show. The last time we talked was when your book came out in September, but I want to go back a little bit to, I'm curious how much there's been so much conversation about this topic, so much talk about what can be done, some small steps being taken. How much progress do you think has been made when it comes to the representation of women and minorities in the workplace since your lawsuit?
I think there's been more attention paid to the problem, and I think there's a much deeper understanding of the problem. But I don't see a ton of momentum behind real solutions. So that's the piece where I'm glad you wrote your book. I'm glad people are continuing to push these issues. I do think that it's the stories that people hear that will actually cause change, but it's taking time for people to change their emotional responses to these issues, which has been frustrating because you want people to hear the story and change, but they're really slow to do that.
Now, the broader Me Too movement has its roots back in the mid-2000s, and a woman named Tarana Burke who coined that term to describe this idea of empowering women simply by saying you share that experience. In my view, you kind of started tech's Me Too movement. What do you think about that?
It's been hard for me to internalize that and to own it, but I do think, I'm trying to a little bit to show, like, this is what one person can do. This is what one person telling my story can do. It has this ripple effect where other people start telling their stories. So it's not all me causing this change. It's, I was one of the first, and it caused a lot of other people to tell their stories. And together, all of these stories are causing people to really rethink, is the tech industry a meritocracy? No.
And yet, as I've been talking about my book and mentioning your experiences as well, people have said to me, well, why hasn't tech had its Me Too movement? Or why has the tech Me Too movement lost momentum? Do you think it's lost momentum?
I think it's still progressing. You still see people now struggling with, like, what do I do with this person who's done these terrible things, which didn't happen a year ago. But I do think that people who have had the worst experiences have not shared their stories. And I can't blame them. I think tech is even more insular than some of these other industries and more punitive. Like, you look at the people who have spoken up, and it definitely has impacted their careers.
So why do you think the Me Too movement hasn't broken through in tech? I mean, is it because of NDAs? Is it because these women are employed by companies that then they are also beholden to, and they're worried about their jobs? Which, of course they're worried about their jobs in Hollywood as well, but we don't have Reese Witherspoon or Rose McGowan to sort of talk about it at the Oscars or the Golden Globes.
Yeah, I think it's, I think we still need to get the CEOs of these big tech companies to stand up and push for change in a way that is meaningful and in a way that is working together. My understanding is tech has not done that yet, and you see that the Hollywood folks have been able to pull together CEOs to make commitments, to commit to being 50-50, to commit to funding the legal defense fund. So I think there have been more incentives for people to actually change in Hollywood than in tech, and I'm struggling to try to figure out, like, what is the thing that will cause CEOs to really work together to transform the industry, which has not happened yet.
Do you think it has to do with NDAs at all? Or do you think that's just a formality, and the fact that people are, basically asked to sign a vow of silence?
Yeah, I think NDAs are a huge problem, and I think it's something that, I have people come to me that, like, I signed this NDA, but people are starting to talk about this thing that happened to me, and I want to clean up the record, but I've signed this NDA. I don't know if I'm liable for more than the amount that I signed for. It is an issue that prevents people from talking, and these are stories that need to be told. I would find it very difficult for a company to actually sue on one of these issues, to actually go out there and say, this is something that happened and we want to have this person be silenced around it, and we paid to silence this person. But it is a real fear of people, and I think it's also in Hollywood. People signed NDAs there. So I just don't understand why it's so hard in tech for people to actually change, to take these stories that they're seeing in all other industries and internalize them and try to make their companies better.
We've seen some of the men in tech try to start their second act, whatever that looks like. Should we allow that to happen? At what point do we as a society forgive these people, if
it's
ever?
a struggle because I've known a lot of them. I've been friends with a lot of them. If you've been in tech, you've interviewed them, you've spent time with them, and they're not all bad people. But what they've done has been so toxic to the industry that you feel like they do need to show some meaningful change in action and not just talk before you start to think that they are actually able to be part of the solution and not to continue the problem.
We've seen some lawsuits against Google specifically alleging discrimination against white men. So let's start with James Damore, who sued Google for being biased against conservative white males. He lost that suit. But what was your take on that situation?
I think it was, it did a role, it had a role in raising these issues, that there are people who believe that tech is a meritocracy, or if anything, skewed in direction against white men. I think they're not seeing all the facts and the whole picture, and and there are reasons why they don't. I mean, they have one perspective and they're not able to empathize. I think it's hard to pay a lot of attention to the individuals because I feel like, my understanding is they're backed by organizations from the alt-right and that they're being supported, and some of those organizations are trying to feed these issues and are trying to amplify the problems that may not exist as much without their interference. So it's hard to know what's real and what's not real. It's, some of this litigation is also backed by other groups, so you wonder, what do people really feel, and what are people being used as part of a bigger political process? And when I look at these companies, it's a struggle because every company has people who are struggling to figure out what their roles are. And when you have these really racist and sexist and ageist and xenophobic messages filtering through your organization, I do think companies have to be more proactive in saying, we believe in diversity and inclusion, we believe that everybody has a right to work here, and you need to stop it. And I think that's something that's uncomfortable in tech, where we've been promoting this idea of free speech unfettered for a long time.
On that note, another white male recruiter named Arnie Wilberg has sued Google, claiming they discriminated against white and Asian male candidates and alleged that Google systematically instructed recruiters to purge eligible Caucasian and Asian candidates and favor underrepresented groups. Google responded saying, "We have a clear policy to hire candidates based on their merit, not their identity. At the same time, we unapologetically try to find a diverse pool of qualified candidates for open roles, as this helps us hire the best people, improve our culture, and build better products." What's happening here?
I think it's more of this backlash against change, and it's trying to fix the problems that have taken place for the past several decades in tech, where we've created these systems that favor homogeneity. And how do we change it? Well, it requires taking down those systems and really trying to catch up, and to also just transform how you do things. And that is uncomfortable for people who succeeded in the system.
You've made some comments where you've suggested that people need to be fired in order for real change to happen. Who should be fired?
I think people who don't believe that women and people of color and people who are older and people who are immigrants are equal employees who are able to do the same work and have these innate biases against them should be fired. If you can't treat your coworker equitably and fairly, then you really have no place in the workplace.
How do we know who those people are? I mean, is this a matter of if you haven't gotten results, or if you haven't tried, or if you've made an untoward comment? How do we identify the people who aren't doing enough?
I don't know that it's really not doing enough. I do think there are people who are saying terrible things about their coworkers, who are sharing private information about their coworkers, so their coworkers get attacked by outsiders. Those people should be fired. There is no place for people who are enabling attacks on your coworkers in the workplace. When you say doing enough, I'm not, that's kind of hard to define. So I think, the part is, you want people who believe in your culture, and if they don't believe in your culture and they show that, then they don't belong, right? They're not promoting your workplace ideals, they're not on the same page, and they're making it harder for others to do their job.
You were CEO of Reddit for a time. You made some dramatic changes that actually the research shows actually helped cut down on hate on the site. And one of the questions I ask in my book is, how might the internet be different if more women had been involved in creating these systems and designing these systems in the first place? Do you think that online harassment and trolling would be such a problem at whether it's Reddit or Facebook or Twitter? If women had been there from the start.
I think it, it's unfortunate that they were mostly started by white men and run by white men for so long, and that most of the engineering teams were white men, because nobody ever experienced it the same way that people who were of color or who were women or non-binary experienced it. I mean, it's if you don't experience it, it's hard for you to address it. And there wasn't anybody calling attention to these problems. And you see it on other platforms too, like Nextdoor and Airbnb, who now are trying to fix problems that came from a homogeneous workforce, and now they're trying to bring in changes to make sure that their platforms are more open and more inclusive and don't reflect the biases that their early employees didn't experience.
Let's talk about Facebook. What do you think can be done to fix these issues at Facebook? It's a big question, but I know you have some thoughts.
I really think that if they brought people into their leadership team, onto their board, who were actually part of the executive team, who were underrepresented people of color, that it would be transformative. If they had more diversity at their executive level, it would make a huge difference in how people understand issues, because it's coming up at every major decision point versus after the fact, bubbling up through the organization and being quashed at various points. I don't know exactly how Facebook works, obviously, but from what I've seen in having this team at Reddit, where people were experiencing the harassment, who were, people were deep in the product and were able to share their experiences, and that really helped us make change. Like, they understood, hey, we should start small, we should focus on like one issue at a time, and these are the issues, and this is the order that we're going to go in, and do things very methodically. I don't know that there's somebody who understands these issues of harassment and the toxicity on their platform the same way as somebody, especially like a woman of color, would understand.
Jack Dorsey recently made a new commitment to, cracking down on online harassment on the site and creating more healthy conversation on Twitter. Is that possible at this point? Can Twitter be nice, essentially, a nicer place?
Hope so. I mean, that was why I joined Reddit and why I took on the CEO role, because I thought that you could change the platform. And my hope is that it's not too late, because then where are we, right? I still use Twitter. I think it's a great way to connect with people. I think it's a great way to spread a message, but it is very hard to deal with a lot of the harassment and to see it on the site. I think they've done a better job of responding to reports. Like, all of a sudden I see that some of my reports are actually being acted on. I do think it's hard to talk about things and to continue to hear the leadership of Twitter and Facebook talk about changes that they've made when people are really looking for actual change. Like, let's see the conversations, let's see what you're doing, let's make sure that it's not just PR.
All right. Ellen Pao, thank you so much for joining us. Always
Thank you for having me.
On the show.
Always happy to be here.
Thank you.